Prime Minister we've ever had who has a background as an entrepreneur. That means negotiation is what I did every single day of my life. And right now, we've got to negotiate our way outside this crisis. And I will do that by being someone who the EU will engage with, but also someone who doesn't blink and someone who's prepared to walk away if we don't get what we need. I'm also someone who, as Foreign Secretary, wants Britain to walk tall in the world. My dad was in the Navy. I followed him around the country from Plymouth to Portsmouth, from Surrey to Scotland, and I know how important Britain is as a country that upholds democratic values across the world. And that's why I've said I will increase our defence spending to beyond 2% of GDP, on top of our 0.7% aid commitment, because I want us to send a signal to the world at the point of Brexit that the Britain that has had such a crucial role in defending both our security and the values we believe in, that Britain is here, it's back, and our voice is going to be loud. I'll also be the first Prime Minister who's been responsible for our NHS. We Conservatives should always have a social mission. And I want our next social mission to be education. Nearly a quarter of our primary school leavers still don't reach the right standard for reading and writing. And I want us to be the Conservative government that abolishes illiteracy and really says the party of opportunity is going to make sure that every single young person has opportunities as they start out on their life. And finally, politics is about winning elections. And I'm a campaigner. I'll be the first Prime Minister for half a century to have won a marginal seat. And I make two promises. By the time we fight an election again, I will get more young people to vote Conservative as the party of aspiration. We need to have young people on board. And secondly, I won't fight an election until we've left the European Union, because to do so would be absolutely fatal for our party. The crocodile lurking under the water of British politics is the most hard-left, dangerous, anti-British, anti-Western Labour Party we have ever had. It would be a total betrayal of our country and our values to let them anywhere near Downing Street, and I never will. Thank you very much.
Right, let's get straight to some questions then. People have been writing in already. One here on the unity of the Union of the United Kingdom. Clovis says on Facebook, how do you propose to unite all the countries in the UK after Brexit so that we stay together?
Well, I don't want to go so far as to say I'm the living embodiment of the Union, but I do have Welsh blood and I have Irish blood, and I had 2 very happy years of my childhood in Scotland. And I just want to be very straightforward about this. I will never allow our union to be broken up. Never, never, never. I want to give a specific on this though, because I think it is important. I think we were complacent before the 2014 independence referendum in Scotland. We had what felt like a close shave at the time, and I think we've been complacent after that referendum. We need to be constantly thinking about how to strengthen the bonds of our union, and I want to make sure that we're doing that.
Okay, Jim on Facebook has written in to say, as you have both held the office of Foreign Secretary, both candidates that is, what do you consider to be our greatest current international security threat, and what is our greatest international economic opportunity post-Brexit?
Well, it's a very good question, and the biggest threat at the moment is clearly the tension in the Middle East. And as Foreign Secretary, you wake up every morning worrying about that. And choose me, I'll be the first Prime Minister we've ever had who has a background as an entrepreneur. That means negotiation is what I did every single day of my life. And right now, we've got to negotiate our way outside this crisis. And I will do that by being someone who the EU will engage with, but also someone who doesn't blink and someone who's prepared to walk away if we don't get what we need. I'm also someone who, as Foreign Secretary, wants Britain to walk tall in the world. My dad was in the Navy. I followed him around the country from Plymouth to Portsmouth, from Surrey to Scotland, and I know how important Britain is as a country that upholds democratic values across the world. And that's why I've said I will increase our defence spending to beyond 2% of GDP, on top of our 0.7% aid commitment, because I want us to send a signal to the world at the point of Brexit that the Britain that has had such a crucial role in defending both our security and the values we believe in, that Britain is here, it's back, and our voice is going to be loud. I'll also be the first Prime Minister who's been responsible for our NHS. We Conservatives should always have a social mission. And I want our next social mission to be education. Nearly a quarter of our primary school leavers still don't reach the right standard for reading and writing. And I want us to be the Conservative government that abolishes illiteracy and really says the party of opportunity is going to make sure that every single young person has opportunities as they start out on their life. And finally, politics is about winning elections. And I'm a campaigner. I'll be the first Prime Minister for half a century to have won a marginal seat. And I make two promises. By the time we fight an election again, I will get more young people to vote Conservative as the party of aspiration. We need to have young people on board. And secondly, I won't fight an election until we've left the European Union, because to do so would be absolutely fatal for our party. The crocodile lurking under the water of British politics is the most hard-left, dangerous, anti-British, anti-Western Labour Party we have ever had. It would be a total betrayal of our country and our values to let them anywhere near Downing Street, and I never will. Thank you very much.
Right, let's get straight to some questions then. People have been writing in already. One here on the unity of the Union of the United Kingdom. Clovis says on Facebook, how do you propose to unite all the countries in the UK after Brexit so that we stay together?
Well, I don't want to go so far as to say I'm the living embodiment of the Union, but I do have Welsh blood and I have Irish blood, and I had 2 very happy years of my childhood in Scotland. And I just want to be very straightforward about this. I will never allow our union to be broken up. Never, never, never. I want to give a specific on this though, because I think it is important. I think we were complacent before the 2014 independence referendum in Scotland. We had what felt like a close shave at the time, and I think we've been complacent after that referendum. We need to be constantly thinking about how to strengthen the bonds of our union, and I want to make sure that we're doing that.
Okay, Jim on Facebook has written in to say, as you have both held the office of Foreign Secretary, both candidates that is, what do you consider to be our greatest current international security threat, and what is our greatest international economic opportunity post-Brexit?
Well, it's a very good question, and the biggest threat at the moment is clearly the tension in the Middle East. And as Foreign Secretary, you wake up every morning worrying about that. And this situation is not one where either Iran or the United States wants a war. But a bit like with World War I, sometimes the most terrible conflicts can be triggered by accident. And that's what we have to absolutely make sure does not happen. But I think the bigger strategic challenge, because I think the job of a Foreign Secretary is always to look beyond the next few months to the next few years and the next few decades, is the rise of China. And we don't know really which direction China is going to go in. It's not a democracy. We don't share all their values, but we want China to be a terrific success, and we want to be friends with them. And I spend a lot of time thinking about China, not just because of my wife, got the nationality right, but I spend a lot of time thinking about China because I think that is something that we need to get right, and we need to find a way to live alongside China as it grows.
On the question of Iran, you've said recently that we stand by the United States. Does that mean to the detriment of the relationship that the UK has with European allies going forward?
Well, actually, on Iran, we have a disagreement with the United States. We signed up to the Iran nuclear deal, which the United States originally signed up to and then came out. And I do very strongly believe that today the situation would be a whole lot more dangerous if Iran had nuclear weapons. So on that, we have a disagreement with the United States administration. But what I never have a disagreement with the United States is what President Trump said when he came here just a few weeks ago for the D-Day celebrations. He said that the alliance between the United States and the United Kingdom is the greatest in history. And I think we always need to remember that there are no countries that have done more than our two countries to defend freedom, human rights, the rule of law, our values, and that's why we should always treat that relationship as absolutely sacred.
President Trump also made some comments about the NHS when he was over as well, some controversial ones. Nigel on Facebook says, do you believe in the NHS concept of treatment free at the point of demand?
Yes, I do. And actually, Nigel, the most popular tweet I've ever done was one when I took on President Trump when I was Health Secretary and disagreed with something that he'd said about the NHS. I think this is part of our DNA in this country. My dad brought me up saying that one of the best things about Britain was it doesn't matter who you are, rich or poor, north or south, young or old, city or countryside, you don't have to worry if you can't afford healthcare because in this country it's free. And we're, I think, one of the first countries in the world to introduce universal health coverage. And since then, most of the rest of the world has wanted to follow suit. And I think we can be really proud of what the NHS stands for across the world.
What was it that President Trump said in that tweet that you disagreed with? And how would you address concerns about creeping privatisation?
Well, you know, I was Health Secretary for longer than anyone else has been. And I think the proportion of NHS money spent on the private sector went up by 1 or 2%. I mean, it was a tiny, tiny fraction, from sort of 6% to 7% or something like that from memory. So there's no privatisation agenda. In fact, we took the power to decide that away from politicians and gave it to doctors on the front line. What President Trump saw was some demonstrations for the NHS in London, I think, and he tweeted, "This shows that the NHS is a national disaster," or something like that. So I said, no, these people, even though they probably disagree with me, probably even a few placards saying they disagree with me, they are actually demonstrating because they love the NHS. And so he misunderstood what they were saying.
Let's get back to some more questions then. Jonathan on Twitter has said, both of you have talked about securing the rights of EU citizens no matter how we leave. What talks have you or will you have to make sure the rights of British citizens in the EU are also protected on day one?
Well, I've been, as Foreign Secretary, responsible for having discussions with all European countries about the rights of Brits in European countries, and they've all said that they want to make sure that that Brits are able to carry on about 1 million, just under 1 million, living and working in EU countries as they do now. If we had a no-deal situation, then it becomes more difficult. I will give full rights to the 3 million Europeans in this country. They do a fantastic job. I mean, I saw what, the 20,000 nurses, 10,000 doctors from the EU, what the contribution they make is absolutely phenomenal. I believe that most European countries would reciprocate in that situation. I think they would do the right thing, but of course you can't guarantee that.
A question about infrastructure now. Alex on Facebook has said, as Prime Minister, would your government support major transport infrastructure projects like HS2 and the third runway at Heathrow?
Well, I'm aware that what I'm going to say now is not going to be popular with all Conservative Party members, but I will back the third runway and I will back HS2 because if the Conservative Party is not the party for the whole country, we are nothing. And I think it is absolutely essential at the point of Brexit that we show some confidence to the rest of the world. And HS2 is our biggest infrastructure project. What would it say to the whole world if we paused it or said we weren't going to do it anymore? It would say, you know, has this country lost its mojo? And I want us to be the fastest growing, most dynamic, most exciting, greenest, most high-tech country in Europe. And for that, we've got to have these big projects.
Back to party politics now, really. Peter on Twitter says, if you become Prime Minister, how confident are you that you can beat Corbyn and Farage at the next general election with a healthy majority?
Well, I'm very confident. I'm a campaigner. But, you know, if we have an election before we've left the European Union, it doesn't matter how brilliant a campaigner, it doesn't matter how charismatic a leader you are, we will be thrashed. And we'll put Corbyn in Downing Street. So my absolute commitment is that I won't provoke a general election until we've left the European Union. But once we have, and I believe we can, and I believe I can negotiate an exit from the EU, and I've said I'll leave without a deal if that's the only way to leave. But once we have, then there is so much opportunity for us to put Corbyn back in his place. Because the truth is that all the things that Corbyn talks about, you know, standing up for people on low incomes. The party that actually does that is the Conservative Party, which was the party that introduced the national living wage, which is the party that's created 1,000 jobs every single day that it's been in office, which is the party that's got house building up to near record levels. It's the Conservative Party. And we don't just talk the talk when it comes to social justice, we walk the walk.
If the key to general election success is winning over those voters who've turned to the Brexit Party, then how do you intend to win them back?
It's very, very simple. The only way to win back voters who've gone to the Brexit Party is to Brexit. We've just got to get on with it, and then we'll get them back.
But then how do you reassure people that you're not just going to seek extension after extension, because you have said that you are open to perhaps going further than October 31st and Halloween?
There's very little difference in practice between my position and that of Boris. I have said it's true that if we got to the last week of October, we had a deal with the European Union, there was some legislation going through the House of Commons, it hasn't quite got through. I'm not going to rip it all up and leave without a deal. But
honest with the British public about that, as to whether a deal was feasible and likely.
Look, we're all going to know by the time we get to October if there is a deal to be done. We will know that, and I have been very clear, and I've said in this leadership campaign that if we get to October and there is no prospect of a deal, then I'm prepared to leave without a deal. I will leave without a deal, and I will, as Prime Minister, have the mandate to do that because I've said so ahead of being elected. But I would do so with a heavy heart because of the risks to businesses up and down the country and the risks to our union. But in the end, you know, I'm Foreign Secretary. I've been to 29 countries as Foreign Secretary in the last year. And everywhere I go, people respect this country because we are one of the most robust democracies in the world. And what does that mean? We're a country where people like me do what people like you tell us to do. And that means we're going to leave the European Union because that is what the democratic wish of the people was.
A question of character now, which has obviously come up quite a lot over the last week or so. Alex on Twitter says, everyone has their own faults. Could you explain how you would mitigate the potential damage caused by your own?
Very good question from Alex. Very.
Except that everyone does indeed have their faults.
I certainly have plenty of faults, so that's why I think it's very important that, you know, this leadership campaign does not become one where we talk about each other's personalities, talk about the decisions you'd take as Prime Minister, of course, the judgments you would take faced with the national crisis that we're in, of course. How would I mitigate against my own faults. Well, I think one of the things that I have found in the jobs that I've done is that it's incredibly important to communicate with the people that you are responsible for. And I've said before that in the junior doctors' strike, I was doing the right thing, but I didn't get the message across as effectively as I needed to junior doctors, who are very hard-working people. So as Prime Minister, I will do social media very differently to how it's ever been done before, because I think in this day and age, you need to be talking to the people that you're responsible for the whole time, not just at set piece occasions. There's got to be constant contact, and it's very easy to get busy and wrapped up in big matters of state and forget the need to communicate. So that's what I'll do.
Does your opponent have faults?
Look, everyone's got faults, but I think it would demean this competition if we started pointing fingers at each other, because he could find just as many faults in me, I'm sure, if he looked, and you know, so I don't think we should go there.
Another question, and this is coming from Twitter, so thank you all to everyone so far for sending your questions in. Again, use the hashtag AskTheNextPM. Dehenna says, how will you ensure that the North gets its fair share of government spending and of future economic growth?
Well, this is really important because the Conservative Party wins the majority of seats in the South East, the home counties, the seats that I represent. But we can never form a government unless we win seats in the Midlands and the North. And on principle, if we are going to be the government of the United Kingdom, we have to be a government that wants to spread prosperity throughout the whole country. I've talked about HS2, but let me give you two other things. Northern Powerhouse Rail, I'm backing it, we'll do it. And I've said many times, I think our big opportunity is to be the world's next Silicon Valley. I think, you know, with our top universities, with our tech entrepreneurs, we've got more of those than anywhere else in Europe, with our life sciences industries. It really could be Silicon Valley and Britain, the two great centres of tech innovation. And we've got a tech triangle, the London, Oxford, Cambridge triangle, but I will have a northern tech triangle as well, so that the north of our country also gets to benefit from that tech revolution.
What about specifically on the Northern Powerhouse and rail in particular, what additional funding are you committed to?
Well, I have looked at the funding for HS2, for Northern Powerhouse Rail, for the rollout of fibre optic cable, which we need to do much more quickly than the 2033 target that we've got at the moment. And my fiscal rule is that borrowing will fall as a proportion of GDP over the economic cycle, because we should not be racking up debts for future generations. And all these numbers are affordable within that envelope.
Will some of these infrastructure projects fall by the wayside in the event of a no-deal Brexit?
Not if I'm Prime Minister, no. Because I think it's really important, if we have an economic shock like that, that we show confidence to the world, and that we demonstrate that we are going to be the most modern, dynamic, entrepreneurial economy. We're going to do these big infrastructure projects. I lived for a couple of years in Japan, and they had their first high-speed train between Tokyo and Osaka in 1964. It's 2 years before I was born. We're going to have ours in 2026. It'll be better than the Japanese one, but it will be a little bit late, and I don't think we should make that mistake again.
Back to Brexit now. Steve on Facebook is asking, would you support a unilateral reduction of tariffs post-Brexit to a free trading nation? This, of course, harks back to the ongoing row over GATT24, what a no-deal Brexit would mean, and the different interpretations of it.
Well, first of all, I think we've got to knock this GATT24 thing on the head. You can only get an agreement not to introduce tariffs if both sides agree to that. So there isn't, I'm afraid, there isn't a no-deal route that would allow us to take advantage of GATT24. But
what your opponent has been saying.
I'm not going to get drawn into those kinds of comments, and I certainly wouldn't say, it's a lie, because that suggests that someone is doing something deliberately, and I just don't think we should get into that discussion. But it is factually the case that you need both sides to consent to Article 24 of GATT. But to answer your question, what would I do in terms of tariffs? Well, we're a free trading nation, so I would never want to put up tariffs if we could possibly avoid it. I think it's, if you look at the growth of other countries around the world, they've generally avoided tariffs. However, there are specific sectors which I think you need to look at carefully, whether it's the ceramics sector or the farming sector, where on a temporary basis we might have tariffs just to make sure that the economic shock was mitigated.
Litza on Facebook says, do you propose any reform to combat electoral fraud, for example, to prevent the abuse of the postal voting system?
We do need to combat electoral fraud, but the big innovation that we need, and Brandon will probably kill me for saying this, because I'm not sure what the Conservative Party's official position on this is, but we do need to find a way to introduce online voting, because the whole world is going online. If we can bank online, if we can do our Christmas shopping online, if we can book our holidays online, surely we can find a way that is fraud-proof to have online voting, and that is the way the world is going. And I think that will encourage much more participation in our democracy.
A question about the fishing industry now. Anthony on Facebook, what are your plans to restore the UK fishing industry?
Well, I was in Aberdeen, and in fact the largest whitefish market in Europe on Sunday at the weekend, and it's pretty impressive, I have to say. And when you talk to the fishing industry, they say that Brexit is the biggest opportunity the industry has had for half a century, because under the terms of the common fisheries policy, we only keep 40% of our catch, but independent coastal states like Norway keep 85% of their catch. And so it's a very big opportunity for us to leave the EU. And so, my pledge is that we will remain an independent coastal state, and we will negotiate fishing quotas on an annual basis.
Looking to the armed forces now, do you think that soldiers from the 1970s and 80s should face criminal prosecution for things that happened in, for example, Northern Ireland?
No, I don't. And it's a very difficult issue. And I want to solve that issue because I've had constituents who've come and talked to me about it. And I think people who have served their country, coming to the end of their lives, deserve our gratitude for their service. But I don't want to pretend that there aren't difficulties in solving this issue. And the main thing, and I want to be honest about this, the peace in Northern Ireland was hard won. And under the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, there is a need to treat both sides in the same way, however angry we may have felt about what happened. So this is a difficult issue to solve, but I absolutely do think that we need to get a better deal for our armed forces.
This is a question from Jose on Twitter. In 2014, there was just under 24,000 knife and sharp instrument offences, and in 2018, just under 40,000. And this year so far is looking to be at a record high. What will you do to reduce these numbers and gain control of the situation?
Well, I think it's the right question to ask. I do think the reduction in police numbers went too far. I think it's very important that we as Conservatives, and also it's important that folks at home watching understand the difficult decisions that we had to take in 2010 when we had the worst financial crisis since the Second World War. And because we took those difficult decisions and put the economy back on its feet, I was able to negotiate an extra £20 billion for the NHS in my last period as Health Secretary. So we were right to take those decisions, but in one or two areas, I think that with the benefit of hindsight, we can see it went too far, and the reduction in police numbers is one, and the social care system is another. So that is something I would look to change.
There's been another question about that as well, about the impact on police morale, whether you accept the fact that morale is low as a result of that reduction, and whether you would make a commitment to numbers.
I do make a commitment to increase police numbers. I'm not going to give an answer on air now because I think it's something that work needs to be done. But yes, as I said, I think we went too far on that.
Darren on Twitter again has said, what was the most significant thing you learned from being Foreign Secretary that you think you would take then into the role of Prime Minister? Your current role was Foreign Secretary, obviously going into the role of Prime Minister.
I think in foreign policy, you always have to balance up the need to be friendly with other countries with the need to be tough in standing up for British interests. And I think I knew this in theory before, but I've seen it in practice as Foreign Secretary. And when I was Health Secretary, I made it my mission to listen to patients, as well as to the doctors and nurses who do such a great job, but to make sure as the elected representative, I was always listening to the people who are using the NHS. And that's why I try as Foreign Secretary to listen to people like Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's husband Richard, the families of people who've got loved ones in other countries. And you know, let's be clear, there will be a diplomatic price to be paid for countries that don't treat our citizens properly. And that is, I'm afraid, not the only example across the world.
This will probably be the final question then. This is Alexis on Facebook. Lots of questions have come in about social care, and this is no different. When are county councils going to take mental health seriously in the education setting and provide suitable education? She adds that children are being failed through the lack of provision to meet their needs right now.
Well, I will never forget as Health Secretary getting a letter from a father whose teenage daughter, had killed herself. I obviously won't say any names, and I won't even say the part of the country. But what was sad was that this daughter was known to us in the NHS, but we hadn't spotted the degree of risk that she was at with really tragic consequences. And when I looked into this and started to try and understand the issues around mental health better, I discovered that nearly half of all mental health conditions are established before the age of 14. So the real trick with mental health is to catch these conditions early. So I set up a programme when I was Health Secretary that said we're going to have mental health support in every secondary school in the country. That is going to mean employing an extra 19,000 people. It's going to take time to train those people up. So it's not going to be an overnight solution. But if we did that, we'd be the first country in the world to really say that we're taking children's mental health seriously. And as part of that, we've got to encourage people to talk about it, because the other thing I learned is that if we all feel low from time to time, it's a totally normal thing. But if you don't say anything to your friends and the people around you, they can't help you. And that's something that we've all got to change as a society.
Jeremy Hunt. Your time is up. Jeremy Hunt, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks very much.
Thank
Heather.
you.
Thank you.
So one candidate down, one still to come. Obviously, Boris Johnson will be making his way through very shortly. We are still streaming, as I understand it, live on Facebook on the Conservatives page, and you can also still watch this on Twitter as well. A couple of announcements just to make. If we haven't had a chance, I haven't had a chance to ask your question tonight, and you want to say something that's perhaps a bit more detailed as well, you still can. You can go to views.conservatives.com/leadership. And you can then, of course, let the next Prime Minister know what matters most to you. So that address, again, for those people who perhaps find that there isn't enough space in the comment box, or I haven't had enough time to read out your questions. If you've got something more detailed to say, the address is views.conservatives.com/leadership. Now, as I said at the very beginning, this is a slightly different style hustings, and we're going to get straight on with it with the next candidate now. Please welcome Boris Johnson.
Good evening. Thank you, Hannah. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you so much. It's great to be here, and very exciting to join everybody who's watching online or by whatever means you're communicating with us. Listen, folks, I think that I'm the right person to unleash on this particular project now, because our party clearly is facing a crisis. We're losing votes both to the new Brexit party and to the Liberals. I've never known us to be down on 17 points in the polls. I've never known an election when we scored only 9 points it was in the European elections. So we need to do three things, and we need to do them well. Number one, we need to come out of the European Union on October the 31st. And we need to get it done. And I would respectfully say that we need somebody who believes in that project, who's campaigned on that project for many years, and who knows how to get a good deal out of Brussels. And it is absolutely vital that we prepare for a no-deal outcome if we're going to get the deal that we need. And I don't think that's where we're going to end up. I think it's a million to one against, but it is vital that we prepare. And I think actually that's agreed amongst everybody standing in this, or the last two people standing in this contest. Number two, we need to unite our party and unite our country. And in a nutshell, what I would like to do is bring the whole country together in the way that I think I was able to bring London together. If you look at where London was 11 years ago when I became mayor, people talked about a tale of two cities, and we lifted the whole place up. It was people at the bottom of society, the bottom quartile, who actually saw their life expectancy increase the fastest, and we did it through infrastructure, through cutting crime massively, which we did, boosting education using new technology. That is the formula. That is the way we should be bringing our whole country together. And I want to raise education funding. I want to put in fantastic infrastructure across the north, across the Midlands, Wales, the southwest. There's a huge amount that we can do. And of course, a policy that I'm delighted has now also become common ground. We should massively accelerate full fibre broadband for the entire country. It is a disgrace. There are pueblos in Spain where they have better access to full fibre than we do in whole towns in the UK. Lastly, but most importantly, we want to get ready, we want to mobilise our party, our country, get ready to fend off. And I don't want an early election at all. I want to keep going for as long as we possibly can, but then we must get ready to defeat Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, who would be an economic and political disaster for Britain. I would just remind you that the last time I had to face an emanation of the London Labour left in an election, our party was 17 points behind in London when we came from behind and defeated Ken Livingstone. We did it then, we can do it again, and I hope with your support that we will. Thank you very much.
Mr. Johnson, please. So over to our online audience now, and I'll start with the same question that I started with your opponent, with Jeremy Hunt. This is from Clovis on Facebook, and she says, how do you propose to unite all the countries in the UK after Brexit so that the union stays together? Well,
thank you. I think that it's a crucial question. It's often asked, and particularly people ask of Scotland, and they say, wouldn't the Scottish people, Scots, be more likely to break away? And I say, on the contrary, Hannah, they'd be less likely to break away, because actually if you do Brexit sensibly and effectively, you take away so much of the ammunition of the SNP, because after all, are they really going to want to rejoin the European Union, to join the Euro, to join Schengen, to submit Scotland to all the full panoply of European law as an independent country? Of course they're not. With all the problems and complexities that were set up in their relations with England, of course they're not. And actually, get Brexit done right, I think we can cement and intensify the union. And funnily enough, there are things that you need to do on coming out of the EU to legally to underpin the whole UK single market. And we will use every opportunity to strengthen the union, not just with Scotland, but also obviously with Northern Ireland as well.
Charlotte on Facebook says, would you involve Nigel Farage in any negotiation with the EU?
I believe, as a matter of policy, and when it comes to fighting other parties, which I've been doing for a very long time in the name of the Conservative Party, don't give them the oxygen of publicity. That's, you know, so, and that works. I think when I was
Is that a no?
fighting,
Sorry.
it's a pretty clear no. When I was fighting, absolutely not. Look, when I was the second time I think I fought in London, I'm not certain that UKIP even stood against me. That what you do is you talk about what you're doing. We should be proud as Conservatives of our agenda. We're going to take this country out of the European Union on October the 31st and fulfill the mandate of the people. That's what we're going to do. And in so doing, we will take the wind out of the sails of the two other parties that I've mentioned that have sprouted like puffballs, saprophytically feeding off the decay in trust in politics at the moment. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to prick those puffballs, if that's what you do to a puffball. And we're going to...
Okay, we're staying with Brexit then. Nuno on Facebook says, what will be your stance on immigration from other European countries, and how hard will you work in order to prevent your immigration policies from being seen as xenophobic?
Well, don't forget, folks, that when I was mayor, and indeed throughout my political career, I really don't think there's been any other mainstream Tory politician who has been so strongly committed to our society being open to talent and open to immigration. Look at every single speech I ever made as Mayor of London, or indeed as Foreign Secretary. But I do think it should be controlled. And I do believe, therefore, that it is right to go for an Australian-style, points-based system so that the needs of the UK economy can be properly met. Yes, I do want talented people to be able to come here. And yes, I do want the agricultural sector to be able to satisfy their requirements as well. It's incredibly important, but it's got to be done on the basis of a system of democratic control. And so what I would like to do is get the Migration Advisory Committee to look really properly at the Australian-style points-based system.
Would you go as far as to secure the rights of EU citizens in the UK? Your opponent's just done that.
Well, I think I said it the other night. I mean, I'm glad that obviously that so many policies are suddenly miraculously becoming common ground between us, but that's good. These are acts of theft which we Conservatives wholeheartedly condone. You know, I'm absolutely in favour of that. This is something that, frankly, we should have done 3 years ago. And actually, if you look at Hansard for I think the Monday or the Tuesday after the referendum, I stood up behind the then Home Secretary in the House of Commons and said that we should immediately make a supererogatory gesture to the 3.2 million, guarantee their rights in law in the UK, just because that's the right thing to do. They've done it. They contribute to our society. They're law-abiding people, by and large, and they deserve that protection.
Lots of questions coming in over the nature of your cabinet should you become Prime Minister. Alan has said on Facebook, will you appoint a passionate Brexit Chancellor to make sure the Treasury takes a more positive approach to Brexit?
I certainly think that we want a government that takes a more positive approach. And let me perhaps leave it at that, because I think it would be, I should just say, I've made no promises to anybody about this question, though.
None to anyone at all.
I haven't. I learned a terrible lesson from 3 years ago. I've made no promises whatever. Not that I made any then, but it got incredibly complicated. I've made no promises, and I think that's the right way to do it. But we will have a very talented government. I really believe this, and I can see lots of colleagues actually here in this audience tonight. I don't think, in all the time I've been really following Tory politics, there's ever been a time when there's been so much talent in the House of Commons on the Tory benches. I've never known it. So there's a lot to choose from.
I think you may have.
If I get that.
You may have offered Ian Dale a cabinet position on Saturday, but anyway, we'll go over that in a moment.
He'll have to seek election first.
Okay. Rowan on Twitter says, as a young Conservative myself, how would you get young people to vote Conservative at the next general election?
I think, number one, it's about housing and home ownership, the prospect of home ownership. Number two, we've got to talk up the incredible things that we're doing on the environment, and these are things that passionately engage young people. And I think that the third point to remember is that you know, in my experience, and I've been asked this question literally for the last 25 years, young people really, in the end, they're going to want all the same things they're going to want good jobs, they're going to want economic progress. But there's one crucial thing that I think we can do to help young people to get there, and that is somehow to alleviate what I think is at the moment the excessive burden of debt as a result of their university education. And whether it's incurred as a result of their fees or their maintenance costs, we need to do something to help. Now, the solution may lie in the interest rate, or it may lie elsewhere. I think we need to look at all of it, but we've got to do something, because there's no doubt that that is a key thing. But there's a whole package of things we should be doing for young people.
David on Facebook says the UK was and still is in some areas a top-level engineering powerhouse. What is your position on supporting engineering sectors which have been third place to, say, the financial and certain technology sectors?
Well, I think that's a brilliant question, and thank you, because I agree with that. And this is the UK was the home of the first industrial revolution, thanks to the innovative brilliance of British engineers. And they came up with solutions to things, and they devised, whatever it happened to be. I mean, I think I have a long list of things that were invented here, from the theory of nuclear chain reaction to the machine gun to you name it. It's all happened here, and it's still happening here. We are the world's leaders in battery technology. It's unbelievable. A fact I owe to a colleague who told me about it a year ago. I didn't believe it, but it's true. So the 21st century motors, all the pioneering stuff is still going to be done in this country, 200 years on. It's absolutely incredible. And to promote that, to promote engineers, we've got to do more for further education in this country, and more for practical qualifications, because
into STEM subjects as well,
and to absolutely to encourage girls into STEM, and we did a lot of that when I was mayor. We had a whole program to get girls doing coding across the city, because that is fantastically important.
Okay. Back to Brexit now. Mitchell on Facebook says, Boris, if you cannot get a deal through Parliament before October 31st to ensure a no-deal exit, would you call a general election or ask the Queen to dissolve Parliament?
Look, it would be absolutely crazy for any of us to think of going to the country, of calling a general election before we get Brexit done.
So if you can't get it through Parliament, what do you do? Do you suspend Parliament?
Well, look, I think the first thing is to recognise that politics has changed since March the 29th. And I think colleagues do see that. We are facing not just the Tory party, but also Labour. We're facing an existential threat. We may be on 17 points, but they're on 19 points, and they managed to, with heroic incompetence, to go backwards in the recent council elections, the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. We all need to get this thing done, and we need to move forward. And that's why I think that they will want to get Brexit over the line on October the 31st and then move forwards. And when that election comes eventually, I just remind you that I think we're going to need to be ready to wallop Corbyn for 6. And I repeat my earlier point. I think I'm certainly best placed to do it.
If time is against you, which most would argue it is, if you become Prime Minister as far as Brexit is concerned, would you consider suspending parliamentary recess, the summer recess?
Well, I'm a great believer in the natural common sense of my friends and colleagues on the Tory benches, and I also think that common sense is breaking out across the House of Commons. I think we can get this thing done without having to resort to such a desperate expedient. And I'm just looking at some of friends looking at me with what they call a wild surmise, anxious about their summer holidays. I think we can get this done, my friends, without having to suspend recess.
There are a lot of people who have written in with questions asking specifically that in the real world, companies, when there's an existential crisis or any kind of crisis, holidays are cancelled. Why doesn't that apply for MPs?
Well, I think that maybe the answer to that question, very frankly, is that I'm not convinced that Parliament can necessarily sort out the problem that Parliament has helped to create. I think perhaps more sittings of Parliament are not what we want. What we want is everybody coming together to in a spirit of responsibility, collegiality, and let's get this thing done.
Which does suggest, though, that you're prepared to sort of bypass Parliament in order to get your deal through.
No, I don't think I didn't pick that up from my answer. I was listening to it as I said it. It didn't seem to me. It didn't seem to me that I said that at all. I mean, I know there is a look. I mean, there are some people who talk about. I think you're driving Hannah at this proroguing thing, right? Is that what you?
Exactly.
Is that what you want to come to? Look,
That's what I was asking.
Okay, that's what you're saying. Forgive me. Okay, look, I just return to my earlier point. I think our colleagues really are starting to come together. They are thinking about this in a very mature and sober way. I am not attracted to archaic devices like proroguing. Let's get this thing done as proud members of a representative democracy that asked the people of this country a question, that received a very clear answer, promised faithfully to put that answer into effect, and now we've got to do it.
Steve on Facebook says, would you support a unilateral reduction of tariffs post-Brexit to a free trading nation?
I think that to any free trading nation, on the principle that is Adam Smith would say that was the economically sensible thing to do. I think we'd have to look at it. I would be more interested, obviously, in bilateral reductions. If we're talking about non-EU countries, I think obviously we're going to want to do free trade deals with others, and the work will begin pretty much straight away on that. But I don't think we want unilaterally to lift our tariffs and forego the opportunity to negotiate better access for UK firms to their markets.
When you say the work will begin straight away, is that as soon as you enter 10 Downing Street, or is that on November the 1st?
Well, the work is actually, Liam, to be fair, has already done a great deal of preparatory work insofar as he's been legally allowed to do it under the doctrine, as you know, of sincere cooperation with the EU. It's been quite difficult for him to make much progress. Liam Fox, Trade Secretary. There is clearly, as soon as we come out, November the 1st, legally, that's it. We take back control of our tariff schedules in Geneva. There are things that we can already start to do, and we can offer them in anticipation of the completion of that deal with the EU. That's a fantastic moment for the United Kingdom. We should be proud of that. We should get going on that. And now, it will also mean that we have to complete the FTA with the EU and make sure that we've got to deal with them too.
Okay. Kath on Facebook says, please outline your housing policy, particularly with a view on the leasehold scandal.
Well, I think that we have too many people who simply cannot get the housing they need. And I want to see more housing, more possibilities of home ownership for people across the country, and particularly for young people. And so my policy on housing is to encourage better, more housing, but not on green belt sites. And I think it's very, very important to be clear about this. I think we've had a lot of pressure on the southeast of England to build homes, frankly, in areas where it's caused a great deal of unrest, and a lot of good conservative councillors lost their seats in the recent elections because of the protest against the rate of construction on the greenbelt. Now, we've got to be very careful about what we do. The answer is to use good transport infrastructure to liberate development on brownfield sites. That is the way to do it. And I would, if you look at what we did at Vauxhall, Battersea, Nine Elms, we were able to get huge developments going there by extending the Northern Line. And if Sadiq Khan had any gumption at all, he would be going ahead now with Crossrail 2, which has the potential to generate that whole area
Are you
up.
prepared to put a number on? I think the Conservative goal at the moment is something like 300,000.
Let me tell you, Hannah, in the Lower Lee Valley alone, you could build 200,000 homes on brownfield sites if you got Crossrail 2 going. I'm not, but we're not building enough at the moment. That's the truth. But there are areas where you can do it. And just if you want a vision for the country and how we can take this country forward, we've got to recognise that there is huge pressure on housing and on the cost of housing in the southeast of England because we haven't got that levelling up of the whole of the country. And if you put in better infrastructure, and if you put in full fibre broadband, and if you increase the quality of education around the country, then you'll actually enable people who are currently migrating, leaving towns around the UK to come to the great metropolis and come to the southeast, the most productive region in the whole of Europe. You'll enable them to make their lives, to raise their families, to start their businesses in those towns, and to bring jobs and growth to those areas. And that is what we should be doing. And if you look at what we did in London, I hate to bang on about this, but it is true, we were able, with great transport infrastructure, and to diversify the hubs and the nodes of economic growth. And that's the way to do it. Lift up around the country.
The specific question from Kath was, though, can you outline your housing policy with a view on the leasehold scandal?
Well, remind me what if Catherine would explain exactly what she wants to do.
She just says, Kath on Facebook says, please outline your housing policy, particularly with a view on the leasehold scandal. So not so much about house building.
I don't know exactly which leasehold scandal she's referring to, but if she, I will be happy to write to her.
Okay. Kath, you're going to get a personal letter.
Kath, I will write to you and do my best to help.
Fine. Stephen on Facebook, this is on student loans, says, will the interest rate on student loans be reduced to base rate plus 0.5%?
Well, I mean, that's the kind of thing that you could do. And well, I don't want to make a pledge now, but I've indicated earlier that that is one of the areas where I think people are under particular pressure.
Okay. Steve on Twitter says, I work in steel in the UK, where we face an enormously uneven playing field. Steelmakers only pay half as much for electricity in France than they do in the UK. How would you level that playing field?
I think that is a massive issue, and I think we need to look at the cost of electricity in this country. We need to consider whether there are things we can do on state aids that are currently forbidden by EU rules, and there may be things we can do on procurement that are forbidden by OJEU processes that would enable us to help steel companies and to help the workers at Scunthorpe. I mean, there may be things that we can do. I really feel for what is going on there, and I would certainly want to help.
I asked this question to Jeremy Hunt as well. This is from Jim on Facebook. As you have both held the office of Foreign Secretary, what do you consider to be our greatest current international security threat? And what is our greatest international economic opportunity post-Brexit?
I think that the reality is that we face a variety of different threats. We face clearly a security threat from terrorism, which results from is generated by associated with an arc of instability in the Middle East, running through to South Asia. We clearly face real problems from our relationship with Russia and the way Russia behaves, and we need to manage that, and it's very, very difficult. And I was very proud that when I was Foreign Secretary, we faced a very serious challenge when the Skripal poisoning took place in Salisbury, and we were tasked with trying to persuade other countries to support the UK by expelling Russian spies, and they did to a degree that we really found quite extraordinary. And we thought we'd get about 30 expelled, and actually we got about 153 from 28 countries around the world.
What do you make of recent reports that allege that certain cabinet members are saying that you yourself would be a security threat as Prime Minister?
Well, I think the great thing about this campaign is that the maxim I've tried to follow is, Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment: never speak ill of a fellow Conservative, and I'm sure everybody will do that. This is
the question about knife crime. Graham says, what will you do as Prime Minister about the extremely worrying rise in knife crime, particularly in London?
Well, I just, I hesitate to remind you of this, Hannah, but I'm going to. And I see Nick Dubois and others who remember this well. 11 years ago, when I began as Mayor of London, there was an absolutely almost identical spate of knife crime in our capital, and we were losing young kids, teenagers, at the rate of about 30 a year. And I tell you what we did, we had a massive programme of stop and search, and we got the police out on the streets. We kept police numbers high. Over a period of about a year, they took 11,000 knives off the streets of London. And do you know what? The murder rate, serious youth violence came down by 32%. The crime overall came down by about 20%, but the murder rate came down by 50%. And that was because we had a very proactive approach to policing. And if I may say, you've got to back the police. So if you ask me what I would do now, I would give the police what they call political top cover. Political top cover to do what they signed up to do. And, to those who say that stop and search is discriminatory or, divisive, come on. Actually, I've talked to the mothers of kids whose lives are at risk, and they want us to do this. I've talked to the mothers of victims. For heaven's sake, there is actually nothing more, when a kid is walking down the street going equipped with a bladed weapon, there's nothing more kinder or more loving that you can do than to ask him to produce that weapon and turn out his pockets. It's almost invariably a him, of course. And that's the right thing to do.
I want to ask you about the NHS. Same question that Jeremy Hunt had as well. Nigel on Facebook says, do you believe in the NHS concept of treatment being free at the point of demand?
I do.
And are you concerned about
Totally.
creeping privatisation?
Under my premiership, the NHS will be free to everybody at the point of use, of course.
And that wouldn't change even with...
Absolutely not. Particularly not in the event of some free trade deal with the United States.
I was going to ask you specifically about the United States. President Trump said that it was still on the table.
I knew you were going to say that.
President Trump did say that the NHS was still on the table.
I think he, unless I miss my guess, I think the president then later retracted his remarks. Yeah. Did he not?
Yeah. Well, do you trust President Trump then?
Well, I certainly can trust very much in the version B of what he had to say.
Okay, final question then. Scott on Twitter says, how will you rebalance investment between the north and the south of he says of England? Yeah.
That is the crucial question. And just get back to everything that I have been saying. I do think that we need to be I want to be the Prime Minister who does not just for Midlands connectivity, but also for Northern Powerhouse Rail, what we did with the tube upgrades and Crossrail for London. As I said, because it's so socially just. You're letting people on modest incomes commute easily to their place of work. It's a fantastic liberator. Transport is the great unsung liberator and engine of social justice. It really is. It really is. We should do that. But it's also a question of, as I say, of investment in education, in technology, and recognizing that there are literally hundreds and hundreds of towns in the UK. London is brilliant. The big cities, the 12 core cities of the UK, are also starting to do brilliantly. But then there are about 300 or 400 towns where actually some are doing well, but some economically less well. And society is less happy. And that was part of the Brexit vote, don't forget. But there are things you can do. There are ways you can stimulate activity and ways you can bring on the economic growth in those areas. And it's about infrastructure, it's about education, it's about technology, but it's also a bit about devolution and inspiring local pride and initiative. And as Conservatives, we should be doing that as well.
Boris Johnson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank thank you to all of the viewers who've been watching online. Tomorrow I will be with both candidates in Bournemouth as the hustings continue. That's just available for questions from the Conservative Party membership. But remember, you can still continue to ask questions to the Conservatives, to the candidates as well. The questions can go in slightly more length than I've had time to get through this evening. views.conservatives.com/leadership. And thank you so much for your contribution this evening.
What's going on? Did she say today in Bournemouth? Pretty sure she said that, didn't she? Let's see. Let's see if we can find this motherfucker. 9 hours ago, 2 hours ago, 3 minutes ago. Oh, it's live now on The Guardian. Apparently, Johnson calls for cross-party solutions. So it's live somewhere. Where the fuck is it then? Where's the watch button, motherfuckers? So it's definitely on right now. It's on right now. Where is it? Where is it? That's on The Guardian. Oh, for fuck's sake, that thing. Okay, fine, whatever. Fuck. It's on now. It's on now, people.
Yeah, the unions didn't like it at all.
Fuck.
And we had some very tough arguments.
Well, I have to use that.
The way I think I was able to prevail.
Oh, that's good. It's not there.
And to make the reforms, and it was basically closing a load of ticket offices and radical thing the tube works. I was able to do it because, as chairman of Transport for London, I put my arms around everybody involved in that organisation, and I championed them. And you've got to love up the people that you lead. If you see what I mean, it's very, very important.
Oh, got to turn the mic off.
Well, I mean it. There is no point if you're a leader in a great mixed economy like ours. You can't just be the chief consumer. You're the chief producer. You're the person who leads that public service. You're the person who champions those people. You've got to extol what they're doing, as well as reforming them, and making changes. And it's only by extolling what they're doing and championing them that you'll actually be given the space to make the changes that are necessary. That's what I mean.
Dan, thank you. The next question is from Amanda Biddle. Over to the right, please.
Hello there. I'm a local dentist, and I was wondering what plans you might have to improve the availability of NHS dentistry in the south.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm aware and there is a problem with NHS dentistry, and I'm aware that it's particularly acute in this area. All I can say, I don't want to pretend that I have an instant answer to the problem, but you know, I will take it away and do my best to address it. But I do not have a magic solution for NHS dentists here in this area at the moment. But the answer in general should be that we properly fund the NHS, and we properly fund every aspect of NHS care. And my central contention and message is that you can only do that with a sensible Conservative government that believes in the wealth creation that's necessary. And you know, I'm very glad that under this Conservative government that we've been able to get an extra 20 billion. It's now time that 20 billion found its way to the front line, and that doctors and nurses actually saw the benefits of that 20 billion, to say nothing of NHS dentistry. I don't have an instant answer as to how to produce more NHS dentists in this area, but I will take it away.
Okay, Laura Nelson now. Question from Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura Nelson. I'm from the Devizes constituency. I've been waiting over 40 years to leave the EU. It's my most immediate policy need for the party. I'm just wondering, would you, given the opposition in Parliament to leaving the EU, including that of Speaker Bercow, would you be prepared to prorogue Parliament in order to get Brexit through?
Well, I want you to know, look, I'm trying to be the Prime Minister of a representative democracy, a great representative democracy in which we believe in our elected representatives to take the right decision. And I would rather than confiding in some archaic device to get this thing done at my own behest, I would rather confide in the maturity and common sense of parliamentarians, all of whom are now staring down the barrel of public distrust. And let's get this thing done. We asked the people of this country whether they wanted to leave or remain in the European Union. It was a very sensible question to ask them, given the way that entity has changed in the last 45 years. It went to people's sense of themselves, of their country, of their future. It was essential to ask the people of this country. It was an entirely reasonable question. Everybody thought about it in great detail. I think I remember I took part in the campaign. People thought about it very deeply, and they returned an answer. It was a very clear answer, particularly when you consider the arguments that were ranged against the Leave side of the argument. It was a very clear answer. And I think MPs, having voted Article 50 through, having promised to do it, have now got to get on and do it or incur a fatal retribution from the electorate. So,
specifically on the question of proroguing, though, this idea of discontinuing Parliament without dissolving Parliament, you said yesterday you were not attracted to archaic devices like proroguing. Will you categorically rule it out?
Well, you know, I'm not attracted to the idea of a no-deal exit from the EU, but you know, I think it would be absolutely folly to rule it out. I think it's an essential tool of our negotiation, and we're going to get ready, and we're a great country, and we're going to do it. I don't particularly, you know, as I said, I don't envisage the circumstances in which it will be necessary to prorogue Parliament, nor am I attracted to that expedient. How about that?
It's still on the table, though. Still on the table, though, I think. Got from that. Alan O'Sullivan
There's a lot of things
has a
on the
question.
table, but you know, we've got it. It's a big table.
Hello there. District Councillor and Chair of New Forest West, and also CEO of a local academy. So with that in mind, with schools reducing staff and increasing class sizes to stay within their budget, what can you do to improve the situation when you're PM?
Well, Alan, thank you very much for what you're doing, and you know, I think your question in a way has already been answered tonight. I hope you've heard it, but if you haven't heard it, I will repeat it. The number one thing I will do the day if I'm lucky enough to get into number 10, we will take steps to increase education funding and to reflect the needs of schools around the country. You know, at the moment, yeah. Look, of course, London has particular expenses. We all understand the extra costs on teachers and schools in London, but at the moment the per capita per kid payment is about £6,800, or up at that level in some places. In parts of rural Britain, it's down at 4,200, or perhaps even lower. You know, these are big discrepancies. It makes a big difference to schools, to teachers, to the lives and hopes of the kids. So come on, we've got to level up, and that is, you know, that is the core message about what I want to accomplish if I'm lucky enough to be elected. It's about leveling up this country. Brexit was partly about democracy, it was partly about immigration, but it was also, you know, very largely about democracy and substantially about immigration. But it was also about a sense in too many places around the UK that they were left behind, and that they were unloved, that they weren't sufficiently invested in, and not part of the gigantic success of London and the South East, which are the most productive regions in the whole of Europe. You know, these are knockout success in that area, but you know, literally 500 towns around the UK that could be doing so much better. And we've got to lift up the whole country. There are ways of doing it with infrastructure, with education, with technology like broadband. We should get on and do it, and that's what I want to do.
Can you make a commitment on education funding?
Yes, I think I already have.
Can you make it again?
I want to raise education funding It will cost billions, but it has got to be done.
A specific sum?
Well, it'll be around 5 billion is what I think we'll need to spend, but it has to be done.
Okay, around 5 billion. Chris Russell has a question.
Good evening. Chris Russell, Winchester, Conservative Association. I've been musing recently about what we'd call a collective noun for Conservative Party members, and I came to the conclusion it would be a division. We have a very fractured party. How will you heal that fracture?
Chris, I agree with you. The sad thing is that what you say is true, but I think that the reason we feel divided is because there has been such a lack of decision and such a lack of clarity. And, you know, we all know the psychology, what it's like when people feel that they don't, there's an argument about which way to go. Of course, there's no clarity, and people wrangle, and that has actually paradoxically got worse since the referendum, not better. And what we need now is a clear charting of the way ahead, and above all, to come out of the EU on October the 31st. And if you do that, shall I tell you, what will happen, of course, is that both these puffball parties that I've described, and I don't wish to be disrespectful to them or to anybody who supports them. Well, what I mean is that they've sprouted saprophytically on the decay of trust, so that they've arisen because people feel that they can't trust us or Labour to get Brexit done.
And people can trust you.
They certainly can. They certainly can. I think it's absolutely crucial. And to get back to your point, if we get it done in the way I want, and we will get it done, then what will actually happen is that far from people feeling more divided, the object of controversy will be removed. And we, as a party, will be able to get on with the things that basically unite us. And the great project on which we are united is, I think, taking this country forward with that very, very simple vision of modern conservatism, which we trust in the market, trust in enterprise, support business, but because we know that that's the way to pay for fantastic public services and so many other wonderful civilized things. And that is a very, very easy message to sell. But we haven't been selling it for the last 3 years. So let's get back to that basic conservative tune. It's a great song.
And with that, your time is up. Boris Johnson,
Already?
thank you very much indeed. Yes.
Is that an hour?
Yeah, overall, yeah.
Was it an hour? Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Boris Johnson.
Thank you.
Now, of course, it's time to hear from the other candidate running to be the leader of this party and of the country as well. Before Jeremy Hunt comes out to speak to you, we're going to hear from his campaign team as well, a video.
The most striking quality about Jeremy Hunt was his unwavering commitment to get results. I think perhaps part of that is to do with his background in business. No matter what the obstacles were, he was prepared to push through them. He wanted to get results.
I've seen him deliver on the things that matter most to the British people. He has credibility from all sides. I trust him on Brexit.
I've known Jeremy for 40 years, and about 25 of those years we've worked together, setting up various businesses. Those early days were absolutely about his determination and grit. He would never give up.
When I first met Jeremy, I realised he was a man who actually was committed to making a difference.
In 2008, I lost my baby son Joshua as a consequence of serious failures in his care during my campaign to kind of uncover the truth about what happened. I was struggling to be heard, and Jeremy really listened and treated me as a grieving dad rather than a troublemaker. I knew that this was somebody who was going to change things.
My mum died quite tragically from poor care in Mid-Souths, Jeremy was incredibly kind. He saw the bereaved daughter behind the campaigner, and he saw the people that mattered.
I have known Jeremy Hunt since the early 2000s. He and his business partner started funding the education of children living with HIV in our community-based programme. Jeremy's generosity was sensed by us all.
That desire to make a difference really drives him. It's never been about him. It's always been about what he can do to help others.
The work he's done will save the lives of countless babies, and other families will not have to go through the kind of pain that we did.
People often underestimate Jeremy because he comes across as being such a polite and generous and nice person, and he is. But I remember hearing him warning the EU not to mistake British politeness for British weakness, and I thought that just about sums him up.
I was pessimistic about the London Olympics. I thought, we couldn't mess this up. I remember talking to Jeremy in the build-up. He said, no, we're a great country. We can do this if we have the right mindset. The delivery was outstanding. It also had this element of fun. I know that Jeremy was very involved in getting that balance right.
He believes in Britain as a force for good in the world. He's shown strong values at the FCO and consistently good judgment.
Negotiating, toughing it out when things get really difficult, keeping going, having a vision. Those are the skills that we need in a Prime Minister.
He's a unifier. He's somebody who can reach out to different groups of people.
My dad always taught me that politics should be about making a difference in ordinary people's lives. And Jeremy made a huge difference to our lives. He gave us hope, and that for me was the main thing, that he gave us hope in some very, very dark days.
Please, everyone, show your appreciation. Please show your appreciation for the other man who is vying to be the next Prime Minister of this country, the current Foreign Secretary. Oh, I've got some volume. Good job, I've got a booming voice. Jeremy Hunt, welcome him.
Friends, good evening. This has been an amazing campaign. I've had fish and chips in Aberdeen, a Balti in Birmingham, an ice cream on the front here, the worst photo op you could imagine, 2 free haircuts, I've still got some hair, and there's something familiar about here. Haven't we been here before? Isn't it time we brought our party conference back to Bournemouth? Now, the nice thing about being the underdog is that for the first time in my life, the internet is actually being quite kind to me. And they kindly ran a competition for what my campaign slogan should be. So I had hashtag take a punt on Hunt. I had hashtag Jezzers the Bezzer. And I had hashtag Hunty McHuntface. Now, be very careful how you say that at home, because we are the party of the family. But, friends, we are in a very serious situation. If we get this wrong, we risk no Conservative government, no Brexit, no Conservative party even. But if we get it right, we can deliver Brexit, unleash the potential of our extraordinary country, and send Corbyn packing. Now, we've had a lot of discussion in these Brexit debates about how, but not enough discussion about who. Who is the Prime Minister we trust to go to Brussels and sort this out? And if you choose me, I'll be the first Prime Minister who has a background as an entrepreneur. Now, who here has set up their own business? Just put up your hand if you've set up. That is the Conservative Party, the party of business. And what do? Entrepreneurs, we negotiate. That is what you do every single day with your customers, with your suppliers, with your employees. And what's the first rule of negotiation? You have to be prepared to walk away. And what's the second rule? You've got to figure out what the other people are going to do. And this is where we have a challenge, because there are some people in Parliament, and I totally deplore this, but there are some people in Parliament who have voted and will vote to take no deal off the table. And we have got to recognise we can't wish that reality away. The quickest way to get out of the European Union is to negotiate a deal that can get through Parliament, and that is what this entrepreneur, this negotiator is going to do for our party and for our country, because we are one of the oldest democracies in the world, and in this country we do what the people tell us, and we're going to deliver Brexit. And when we do, what incredible excitement awaits. As someone who set up their own business, I am just champing at the bit to turn us into the fastest growing, most high-tech, greenest, most dynamic pro-enterprise economy in Europe. You know, we've got the top universities in Europe, some of the top ones in the world. We've got more tech entrepreneurs. We could be the world's next Silicon Valley. Here, in this part of the world, you've got the fibre optic program in Bournemouth, superfast Dorset, huge growth in tech jobs. You know what this is all about, and I'm going to take a giant step towards that by cutting corporation tax to 12.5% Irish levels. And we are going to put an economic jumbo jet on Europe's doorstep, so that when it comes to those trade negotiations, they need us every bit as much as we need them. And I'm also the Foreign Secretary who wants Britain to walk tall in the world. My dad was in the Navy. We followed him all around the country, from Devon to Portsmouth to Surrey to Scotland. And thanks to his generation and their service, we won the Cold War. They never took peace for granted, and nor will I. And that's why I've said I'll increase defence spending to beyond 2% of GDP, not just to deal with aggression from countries like Russia, but also because at the point of Brexit, I want the world to know that Britain, one of the few countries that stands up for democratic values and the security needed to underpin it. Britain is here, Britain is back, and Britain's voice is going to be strong in the world. I'll be the first Prime Minister who's been responsible for our NHS. And I always think that we should have a social mission, not just an economic mission. And I was proud to be responsible for some fantastic hospitals in this area: Southampton, Bournemouth, Poole, many great hospitals. But I want our next social mission to be the social care system. In this part of the world, the proportion of over 80s is 50% higher than the national average. Of course, that's no one in the audience tonight. None of you look a day over 40, except for Steve Brine, who's working too hard in Winchester. But social care is important, because as Conservatives, we want every single older person in our country to be treated with dignity and respect. And we also care about younger people. And I want us to be the Conservative government that abolishes illiteracy and make sure that every young person leaves school with the rigorous qualifications so they can get a decently paid job. And finally, politics is about winning elections. And if you choose me, I'll be the first Prime Minister in half a century who's won a marginal seat. I know what it's like to knock on every single door, need every single vote. I'm looking at every single vote right now. And, you know, it's hard work. But I make you two promises. Number one, by the time we go into a general election, if I'm Prime Minister, we will get more young people voting Conservative, because we can't be the party of aspiration unless the most aspirational people are voting for us. And my second and final promise is this: I will not provoke a general election until we've left the European Union. We can't ask for another mandate from the British people until we've delivered the mandate that we were given last time. Forget that, ignore that, and we ignore the lessons of Peterborough, where Labour crept through the middle. We ignore the crocodile lurking under the water of British politics, a Labour Party led by the most ruthless, dangerous, anti-Western, anti-British, hard-left cabal ever in its history under Jeremy Corbyn. The biggest danger to our country. We won't let them take over, and I'm telling you this right now, faced with that hard-left populist, Jeremy Corbyn. Sure, we could choose our own populist, but we can do better. We can choose our own Jeremy. A Jeremy a Jeremy who's going to win the argument for enterprise, aspiration, for true social justice. Not so much for those of us here this evening. Most of us have done okay, but social justice for the young people, desperate for a decently paid job, for families desperately saving up to buy a home, for older people so keen just to live out their time in dignity. Those are the people the Conservative Party is for. Those are the people we must fight for. We've got to deliver Brexit, unleash the incredible potential of our amazing country. Let me show you how. Thank you very much.
Let you take a sip of water first. Why do you want to be Prime Minister?
Because I want to change our country. I think we have, and I was always brought up to believe that we have the most incredible country anywhere. I think you win the lottery ticket of life if you're born a British citizen, because we are a country that is incredibly successful. We fight for our values, but we're also a compassionate country as well. But I look at our country today, and I think there's so much more that we can do, so much more with our economy, so much more to give ourselves the best healthcare and education systems in the world, and so much more as a Conservative Party that we can do to bring our country together after such a difficult and divisive period. And that's what I want to do.
Are you concerned about threats that it could be the shortest tenure in history?
Well, if we get this wrong, it will be. And we have got the biggest constitutional crisis in living memory. And that is because MPs like me made a promise to the people that we would deliver the outcome of the referendum, whatever it was, and we failed. And that has shaken people's confidence in our democracy. So it is a very challenging period, and we need a Prime Minister who's going to pick his way through that, get us to the other side, deliver the Brexit that people voted for, and bring the country together.
If you fail on Brexit, though, to deliver the Brexit that you say that you want, or that no deal is perhaps far more disastrous to this country than you've previously predicted, would you fall on your sword and resign?
Of course. I mean, no Prime Minister is going to last any time at all if they don't deliver Brexit and deliver it very quickly. That is the reality of British politics. That's not about Jeremy Hunt, that's about anyone who does that job. But you know, no deal is for me a last choice, but it's one I would always keep on the table. And if we get to October and there is no prospect of a deal that we can get through Parliament, and no deal is on the table, as I sincerely hope it would be, then I'm absolutely clear I will leave, because that is what we promised, and it won't be easy and it will be bumpy. But we've been through worse, and we would make a success of it. But we have to fulfill that solemn promise to the British people, because when I go around the world as Foreign Secretary, I meet so many countries, they have this respect for Britain, actually a whole lot more respect for us than we sometimes have for ourselves. And what they respect is that we are a democracy. You know, extraordinary things like changing our Prime Minister in 1944, which seems so strange when you look back on it that we would do that. But that told the world that this was a democracy, and that's an incredibly precious thing, and that's why we have to deliver Brexit and deliver it soon.
Your deal for Brexit, what's in it?
Well, I don't think there's a big difference actually between me and Boris in that respect. I think we both want to change the deal that we have on the table to remove the backstop so that it can't trap us in the customs union forever. I think we both want a technology solution. My approach as a negotiator to getting there is to learn the lessons of what went wrong last time. Last time the EU stopped negotiating with us because, very sadly, they didn't believe that the British government could deliver Parliament. They said, what's the point of making any more concessions, because we don't think you'll get it through Parliament. So I'll put on my negotiating team the DUP, the ERG, who are the Brexit purists in our party, Scottish Conservatives, Welsh Conservatives, to show the EU that any deal that we propose is one that we can get through Parliament. And I think that's the first very important step.
You've said in the past that the political consequences of no Brexit would far outweigh the economic consequences of no deal. What about the political consequences of no deal if it started to threaten the United Kingdom and the Union?
Well, I think there is a risk if we had to deal with a no-deal situation. I think Nicola Sturgeon would make absolute hay with that. She wants to persuade people in Scotland that it's badly governed from Westminster, so she would use that. So we would have to do everything we could to make sure she didn't exploit that. And let's be clear, as Prime Minister, I will never, ever allow our precious union to be broken up. So that is going to be a challenge, but I don't think it's insurmountable. And in the end, more than 1 million people in Scotland voted to leave the European Union, and we have to be true to their wishes as well. And I think we can make no deal work, but I would do it with a heavy heart because of the risks, as you say, both to the union and to businesses.
On foreign policy, you're Foreign Secretary right now. What relationships have you forged as in your current role that you think set you in good stead when it comes to Brexit negotiations? So specific relationships with EU counterparts.
Well, I think I have good relationships with all my EU counterparts, but they're very direct relationships. You know, I tell them how it is. I told them 6 months ago, lots of them, that I thought that they were driving a bargain with the UK that was going to be too hard to get through Parliament. And I said, I think you've got to be very, very careful going down this route, because you could end up with a situation that's very bad for the EU as well as bad for the UK. So I don't think it helps to be friendly, but a friend tells you things as they are.
Thinking of counterparts outside of Europe then, this morning your Japanese counterparts and the Japanese government urged the UK to avoid a no-deal situation.
Yes, I have this discussion with the Japanese many times, and they understandably don't want no deal because they've got very big investments in this country, particularly in the car industry. But what I say to them is that, you know, in the Second World War, we fought for democracy across the world, including in Japan. And they have to understand that, in the end, that is something that this country will always fight for. And we made a decision to leave the European Union, a democratic decision, and we are going to honour that decision. And so, you know, if anyone thinks that we would cancel Brexit because of a fear of no deal, they totally misunderstand Britain. But that doesn't mean it's our first choice. We understand their concerns, and that's why I think we need to recognise that, you know, the best outcome is to try and negotiate that deal, and that's what I think I can do.
I want to ask you about your spending commitments so far as well. We've talked about cutting corporation tax, increasing the threshold on national insurance contributions, reducing interest rates on student loans as well, defence spending. You're now making a commitment on entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs.
Yes, indeed. Well, my worry, I'm a supporter of our changes to tuition fees because they've given us some of the best funded and best universities in the world. But I can't, when I knock on doors in my constituency, justify 6% interest rates on tuition fees. It's not fair. And the risk we have with having interest rates that high is that we'll end up discrediting the whole system. So I do think if we want to attract younger people, we have to recognise their legitimate concerns. And I also think, I set up my own business in my 20s. And that was a period when we didn't have tuition fees. And I worry, we want our brightest graduates to go out and do what Bill Gates did and Mark Zuckerberg did and set up these amazing technology companies. But some of those people might be put off doing that with debts of 50, 60 grand. So I want to say to them, and this will only apply to a small number of people, I want to say to them, look, if you go out and you set up a successful business and you employ people, then we'll cancel your tuition fees, because they've done a great thing for the country. They've created wealth for us. They've created jobs, and we should support them and encourage them to do it.
Boris Johnson said that Boris Johnson said earlier we'd be flooded with entrepreneurs, perhaps students straight out of university employing their mates for a couple of years and then and they get their debt wiped.
You know, my specific proposal is that you have to employ 10 people full-time for 5 years. Now, if we're flooded with people doing that, that's brilliant for our country. We should encourage that. It'd be fantastic.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies today has said that with all of the spending announcements that you've made so far, it would cost in the region of 37 to 68 billion pounds. Where does that money come from?
Well, that's because they have misinterpreted what I've said. So the tax cut that I've committed to is a cut in corporation tax to 12.5%. That is expensive. They think it costs 12 billion, I think it costs 9 billion. But if they're right, the truth is with that tax cut, you get about half that money back fairly quickly, because you get more investment, people's profits go up, people employ more people, more salaries are paid, more dividends are paid. So it's actually one of the most efficient tax cuts, but the purpose of that tax cut is to increase our growth rate. At the moment, we're growing at 1.5%. If we could boost that to 3%, which is the growth rate they have in America, that would be an extra £20 billion a year for public services or tax cuts. So our focus in terms of where we spend our money has to be on growing our economy so that we can do all the things we want to do later.
Final question from me then. We spoke yesterday about your time as Health Secretary, and then you said that when it came to the junior doctors' row, that the policy you had was right, but you communicated it badly. Have you learnt enough, and do you think it's enough to convince junior doctors now to support you?
Well, I'll never forget my first month as Health Secretary, and I had to deal with the crisis in mid-staffs. And the Department of Health advised me not to meet the families from mid-staffs. But I ignored that advice, and I met a woman whose mother died a really horrible death. Effectively, she was starved to death. She looked me in the eye, and she said, "Jeremy, you could be the one that changes this." And I never forgot that. And by the end of my time, I had a few more grey hairs, but 6 years on, we had 2.7 million more patients using good or outstanding hospitals every year. And I was proud of that. And I did have some battles. And of course, with the benefit of hindsight, I could have communicated my vision better. And I think junior doctors are fantastic people. They are the future of the NHS. And I support them. And I was sad that we had that battle. But do I regret that focus on patient safety, that focus on raising standards? No, because that's what Conservatives believe in. We say, yes, the money matters, but it's not just about the money. It's about the standards we deliver. And that's something only Conservatives understand.
Okay. It is time for your questions now. So to kick things off, Christine Bourne has a question. Christine.
Wimborne Minster in Dorset. What are the 3 most important pieces of legislation that you, as Prime Minister, will bring forward in the first Queen's speech of the new session of Parliament?
Thank you. Very important question. And so let me tell you what they'd be. First of all, there would be a no-deal bill to make sure that we have all the planning in place, all the preparations in place, so we can fully prepare this country for a no-deal Brexit, if that's what we have to do. And I'm talking about much, much bigger things than we've been able to do in the past. One of the things, if you have customs checks between countries, is that instead of roll-on, roll-off lorries going between us and the EU, you have to move to containers. So we're going to have a big expansion of our container capacity in ports like Dover. Things like that we need to spend money on quickly in order to strengthen our hand in the negotiations. Second bill would be a budget, because I want those business tax cuts to happen right away, because the best preparation we can have for a no-deal Brexit is to fire up our economy and to put money in the pockets of businesses so they can be strong and resilient with all the changes that lie ahead. And then what's the third thing I'd really like to do? Well, I said that I would like to be the Conservative government that abolishes illiteracy. And nearly a quarter of our children leave primary school not able to read and write to the appropriate levels. And I would like to pass the legislation that's necessary to require schools, wherever they are, to make sure that every single young person leaves properly able to read or write.
Are you, excuse me, are you prepared to make a spending commitment on education as well within that legislation?
Yes, but I would do it in the way I did for the NHS, because changing deep-rooted problems like illiteracy doesn't happen overnight. It's not, by the way, about the hard work or commitment of teachers. It's about being very rigorous, particularly in the schools that don't get good Ofsted ratings. But what I would do is I would say, look, I'm prepared to put money on the table, but you need to show me the reforms that you're prepared to do to make sure that every single young person leaves education with those rigorous qualifications that's going to set them up for life.
Any specific number? You put 15 billion on defence. What about on education?
Well, on education, I think I want to talk to them. By the way, we didn't answer your earlier question about what my fiscal rule will be. All my commitments are funded through a pledge that I will keep reducing debt as a proportion of GDP over the economic cycle. So we won't be building up debt for future generations. We actually have now about £26 billion of headroom a year, which is why we can afford some of these commitments. The commitment I will make on education is that and that can be afforded within these numbers, that I will restore per pupil funding to 2015 levels if I can get that commitment to reform.
Okay. The next question is from Tony Devonish. Tony.
Good evening, Jeremy. Getting on with the domestic agenda is key too. Will you implement a policy with the residents of Margaret Thatcher's council house sales to win back the domestic agenda? And here's one example: abolish stamp duty for homes under £1 million.
Thanks, Tony. Very important question. And this is actually a matter of trust for young people, because they look at our generation and they say, you bought a house maybe in your 20s or 30s. It's appreciated in value a lot, which is great for you, but it is much, much harder for us now to get our foot on the housing ladder. Margaret Thatcher got 1.5 million council tenants onto the housing ladder through her Right to Buy scheme. I have an equally ambitious scheme called Right to Own, which will help 1.5 million young people get on the housing ladder, people who can't afford a mortgage or a deposit. And the way we'll do that is by gifting people land that already has planning permission, so that the increase in the value of the land isn't something that goes to developers, but it actually goes to the young person who can't afford to get onto the housing ladder. We'll be publishing details of those plans in the next few days, but that is a central part of my mission, to get more young people to support our party, because that is so important for our future.
Tony had a specific question about stamp duty on properties under £1 million.
Well, I would love to do reductions in stamp duty, but Tony, this scheme is also going to cost money, and I want to focus on getting 1.5 million younger people onto the housing ladder, and I think this scheme can do that.
Okay. The next question comes from Lorna McCulloch.
Hello, I'm Lorna McCulloch from Oxford. What are your plans to alleviate the financial burden on students going to university but do not wish to come out with at least £50,000 of debt? The interest charged at 3% above RPI bears no relationship to the cost of borrowing incurred by the government.
Well, Lorna, we've talked a little bit about this before, but what is crazy about our system at the moment is that only half student debt actually gets repaid. And the reason why the interest rate is so high at 6% is because the Treasury is saying they want the whole scheme to be self-funding. So they ramp up the interest rate for the people who can pay back their tuition fees. But of course, that means more and more people end up not being able to pay back their tuition fees. And what feels so unfair to students is that 6% interest rate is actually ramping up while they're at university, even when they're not working. And it just feels unfair. And I think we have made good reforms. In my generation, we didn't have tuition fees, but only 11% of school leavers went to university. Now it's 50%. That is much fairer, but we need to have a fair system. And so before Hannah asked me how much this is going to cost, to reduce tuition fees, interest rates to around the level of inflation would cost about £1.3 billion a year. That is a lot of money. But I tell you, if we don't do something like that, Jeremy Corbyn's going to come along at the next election and promise to scrap the lot of it, and we're going to lose every single young person to him, and maybe the election as well.
Christine Page has a question. Christine.
Good evening, Mr. Hunt. In view of the complete necessity of completing Brexit by the 31st of October, as a member, I would be baffled that you would not harness the support of all politicians, including Nigel Farage. Would you include Mr. Farage in negotiations?
No. Christine, the reason for that very direct answer is that Nigel Farage doesn't want a deal. He wants a WTO Brexit straight away. And whilst I would be prepared to do that if there was no other alternative, and I'm absolutely clear about that, I think it would be much better for our businesses and much better for our union if we could get a deal. And I haven't given up on that. I think we should be optimistic and positive. When I talk to European leaders, they know this is difficult, but they don't want a no-deal Brexit. They want to find a way through this. And I think if we take the right approach, we can get that. I don't say it's easy, but it's not impossible. And we Conservatives have done more difficult things in the past, and we can certainly do this.
On this question of Nigel Farage, because Boris Johnson was also asked this yesterday, and he said the same as you. He said no, he wouldn't include him in any negotiations going forward. He has, though, garnered so much enthusiasm through the Brexit Party throughout the country. And how will you, as Prime Minister and as leader of the Conservative Party, then counter that threat from the Brexit Party?
Do you know, there is only one way to deal with the Brexit Party, and that is to Brexit. That's what we've got to do, and then we'll deal with them.
But what about using the talents of everyone available, such as the talents of Nigel Farage?
We have got incredible talent in our Conservative Party, and we don't need to deal with people who don't even have any MPs in Parliament. But what I'll say is that as a Conservative Party, if we're going to do this, we have got to learn the values of unity. You know, in the 1980s, we had that great reforming government of Margaret Thatcher, but you had around the cabinet table people like Geoffrey Howe and Norman Tebbit, totally different people around the same cabinet table. In the 1990s, you had John Redwood and Ken Clarke around the same cabinet table. And that's the genius of our party. We have the radical reformers who remind us that we have to be bold if we're going to be a great country, and the One Nation Conservatives who remind us that we have to be compassionate and reach out to the centre ground. And we need both those traditions in our party. And if we come together, we can deliver Brexit. And that's what we have to do in the next few months.
Does that reflect on the makeup of your cabinet as well, in terms of the balance between possible Remain votes in the past and Remainers and Leavers?
Do you know, Hannah, I think it's so dangerous to label people as Remainers, Brexiteers, Brexiteers, Remainers. You know, we are all Democrats. I voted Remain, but like millions of Remainers around the country, I want to get on and deliver Brexit. And that's the way we're going to deliver it. If we come together in this big democratic mission, that's what I want us to do.
We have the next question from Jake. So you weren't, your name wasn't on the list, but you've yelled your question, so if you're prepared to answer it.
I profoundly disagree with my cabinet colleagues or with my colleagues in the Conservative Party, actually, who have voted to rule out no deal. In my cabinet, we will be voting to keep no deal on the table. That will be government policy, cabinet policy, and I would expect all colleagues to follow the line on that, because that will strengthen our hand in the negotiations.
Let's move on. A question from David Siddick. David.
Good evening. David Sidwick, Police and Crime Commissioner candidate for Dorset. Thank you. Will you give more core funding to the police so that the manpower reflects the demand and allows them to address not only serious crime, but the distressing antisocial behaviour, or if you like, quality of life crime, which affects people more on a day-to-day basis?
Well, first of all, very best of luck to you in the PCC elections, and thank you for the question. I was part of the government that came into power, the cabinet that came in May 2010, and we were facing the biggest financial crisis that we'd had in peacetime, and we made some decisions to put the economy back on its feet, what Jeremy Corbyn likes to label austerity. They were very, very difficult cuts in spending. And I think we were right to do that, because the result of that is that the economy has grown, jobs have been created. I was able to secure that big increase in funding for the NHS. But I think it's true also that in one or two areas we can see with the benefit of hindsight that some of those cuts went a bit too far. And the two areas that I would single out are the social care system, where I do think that councils are finding it very hard to deliver the standard of care that we as Conservatives would expect, and also police numbers, where there's a delayed impact. So crime continues to fall for a while when you cut police numbers, but after a while it catches up with you. So those are two areas, without making an explicit spending pledge, that I would commit to look at as Prime Minister.
What about stop and search, expanding stop and search, which Boris Johnson committed to yesterday?
Yes, I agree with Boris on that. I agree with Sajid Javid on that. Stop and search is a very important power for the police. Of course, it has to be used sensitively, but they do have to have the ability to stop someone that they suspect might be carrying knives, committing a crime within the law, and so I support them being able to do what they need to do.
Okay, the next question comes from Jack, either Jack Bolton or Jack who's from Bolton.
Winchester, actually. Good evening. I'd like to ask you if you yourself could make the difficult decision that Jeremy Corbyn cannot. Namely, would you use our nuclear deterrent in extreme circumstances?
Well, Jack from Winchester, my dad was in the Navy, and in his last job in the Navy, he actually had responsibility for the nuclear deterrent, and this was something that we thought about very hard in our family. And if you have a deterrent that you say you're never going to use, it's not a deterrent. And that is why it would be completely wrong for any Prime Minister to say that they wouldn't ever use a nuclear deterrent. The lesson from the success of the nuclear deterrent is that you have to be strong to be safe. And that is what we did in the Cold War. And I think we need to recognise now that the world is becoming again increasingly unstable. When you look at what's happening in the Middle East, when you look at what's happening in Russia, when you look at a China that is becoming more autocratic, and it's been Britain's historic role to be one of the very few countries that doesn't just speak out for democratic values, but also understands you've got to have hard power behind that to have credibility. And that at the point of Brexit, in the start of this moment in our exciting new moment in our history, I want us to do that now too.
Tim Howard. Tim Howard has a question. Tim.
Good evening. Tim Howard from Dorset. The National Health Service has taken on the status of a national religion and is often said to be beyond sensible management and reform, both by those inside it working for it and by those outside it. Do you agree with this? And do you think that the NHS should continue to try to do everything for everybody, regardless of personal responsibility?
Well, the NHS can't do everything, but it can do a lot. And I would like it to continue to do everything that it does for everyone, regardless of ability to pay. Because I was brought up to believe that one of the best things about this country is that if you get sick, you don't have to worry about paying medical bills. And I think that we should be proud that we were, I think, the 6th country in the world to introduce universal healthcare coverage. The Kiwis were actually the very first country to do it. But we were one of the very first. And since then, it's been adopted by nearly every country everywhere in the world. But we also have to recognize that personal responsibility is important. How people look after themselves is important. And we need to encourage people to do that because, as Steve Bryan, the Winchester MP, second time I've mentioned Steve this evening, but he was a brilliant Minister for Public Health for many years, encouraging people to live healthier lifestyles. That personal responsibility is important. But as Conservatives, what I can say is that I look at the NHS and I compare it to other healthcare systems around the world. And we've got our problems, we've got our challenges, but other countries have just as many challenges. And the challenges that we're really facing are because of an aging population. And in countries like America, the challenge is spiraling insurance bills. We're actually one of the most efficient healthcare systems in the world. As Conservatives, though, we understand what you understand. That isn't just about money, it's about reform, it's about standards. And my ambition for the NHS, I would like us in a decade's time to have the best cancer survival rates in Europe, because it still frustrates me that with all the brilliant doctors and nurses that we have in the NHS, we don't get those cancer survival rates that we could. I know we can do that, and that's something I would like to press the NHS to do.
Up on the last point of part of Tim's question then was, should the NHS do everything that it possibly can regardless of personal responsibility? What role do you think personal responsibility has with regards to the health service?
Well, I don't think we should start rationing services. I don't think that's what the British people want. But that doesn't mean we can't do an awful lot to encourage people to live responsibly. When I was Health Secretary, we published a huge program to tackle childhood obesity, and I think we said we're going to halve childhood obesity rates in a decade. We put the program in place to do that, but actually to do that, what we realised is we need the help of parents. This is not something that we can do on our own. So there's a big role for personal responsibility. But if you are clear about how you go about this, people want to take care of their own health. They really do. But we have to make sure we're getting those messages out.
Okay, let's get on with some more questions then. George Smith has a question. George.
Thank you very much. With the recent shortfalls of rail transportation, as well as the National Rail saying that they want to change operations, how would you improve inter- and intra-city travel to help boost economic mobility?
Well, I'm going to say something that isn't particularly popular with some Conservative members living in some parts of the country. But I will deliver HS2. Now, I saw a thumbs down over there about 8 rows back, and I can completely understand why, if it's going through the middle of your beautiful constituency, you might not want it. But let me tell you why. At the point of Brexit, we've got to show the world confidence, and HS2 is our biggest infrastructure project. I lived in Japan for 2 years. They launched their first high-speed rail between Tokyo and Osaka in 1964, 2 years before I was born. We're going to be doing ours in 2026, which is a little bit late. It'll be better than the Japanese one when we launch it, but nonetheless, it's taken a long time. And if we want to be a modern economy, a powerhouse that creates wealth for all our public services like the NHS that we've just been talking about, then we have to do that. And we also have to show the country that we are committed to spreading wealth throughout the country. Our heartlands are London and the southeast, but we won't win any elections without winning marginals in the Midlands and the north. And projects like HS2 are seen in those areas, are symbols of our commitment to the whole country, and that's why I back it.
Question now from Zach. Angle or angel?
It is Angel. What are your plans for diversifying higher education in order to provide more options for college students who are leaving college but don't necessarily want to progress to university or to a job directly, and then in turn provide an attempt to solve the UK's productivity puzzle that's been happening over the last 10 years, really?
Oh, Zach, that's a great question, and I'm pleased you've answered that. You see, I think we have a national blind spot in this country, and it's not the 50% of school leavers who go to university, most of whom, not all university degrees are good, and I do think that we should look at some of the university degrees that end up costing people £50,000, £60,000 and not actually giving them the earning power to pay that money back over the course of their lives. But the people that I really worry about are young people who don't go to university. I talked about illiteracy before, but maybe they don't get a technical education that gives them a rigorous qualification. Now, in Switzerland or in Germany, they make sure that every single young person, whether or not they go to university, leaves with a rigorous qualification that means they can get a decently paid job. What do I mean by decently paid? Well, the average salary in this country is 27 grand. And, you know, if we've got state education, we shouldn't be putting people through that compulsory education and then technical education and further education without at least knowing they're going to get a rigorous qualification that means they can aspire to the average salary in this country. So this is a really big reform, and I think it's something that we need to put a huge amount of energy into. And I think if we do that, we're being true to our Conservative mission, which is opportunity for absolutely everyone. We want to be the party that creates ladders for everyone when they start out on their life. Whether they choose to climb that ladder or not, that's up to them. But we're the party that provides those ladders.
I want to end on a question. This is a question from Omar Al-Rubai, who I don't believe is here, but sent a question in anyway. Is Omar here? Ah, you are. Wonderful. Let me come to you then. I was going to read it for you, but go ahead.
I'm Omar from South Bucks, and many see the embrace of green technology as possibly devastating to the UK's economy, while others see the manufacturing and construction requirements as a job battery. Where do you stand on the green technology and its effect on the economy?
Well, first of all, I think we have to embrace the green revolution. It's a tremendous economic opportunity, but it's also very important morally, because young people look at my generation and they say, you know, we're going to be around in 50, 60 years' time. we don't know if you are, but we do want to know whether you're going to make sure that you properly look after the planet, deal with plastics in the ocean, the melting ice caps, all these things, so that they're there for us. But I think as Conservatives, we are also practical about these things. And one of the things that I want to look into is, I'm going to lose an awful lot of votes right now, but I'm afraid we're going to have to dig up quite a lot of our roads to put fibre optic cable to every front door so that we all get ultra-fast broadband, a 1 gig connection. Now, when we do that in our cities, why don't we at the same time put in electric car charging points so that our cities can go to entirely electric cars and we can have pollution-free cities in a generation? That would be good for the environment, but very popular with voters, particularly young voters who worry when they take their kids to school about engines idling. And I think we should be the party that thinks about these things practically and actually delivers. Banging the drum is fine, but we Conservatives, we're doers, we're not just talkers.
Omar, thank you. And Jeremy Hunt, thank you very much indeed. That's all we've got time for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And a big thank you to all of you as well for a big thank you to all of you as well for showing off on what is a very, very humid day in Bournemouth. So we appreciate very much you being here. I hope that you heard what you wanted to hear from both the candidates vying to be the party leader. The next stop on the Hustings Trail, I believe, is Exeter, and it will be Ian Dale who's back as your host for that. But thank you for your contributions today.
Pretty missed the first half though. We missed I think we missed a good 20-30 minutes of Boris, which is a bit shite considering he was on first. We got the full Jeremy Cunt one though. Yeah, I mean they're both Tories. The only thing I like about what they both said is we need better internet. I mean, Jesus Christ, honestly, what's with these copper wires? It's just so fucking stupid. We need fast internet. If you want to supercharge your country, give people fast internet connections. It's faster to do everything. It just is. You get more done. You can upload your files faster, download files faster. Someone works digitally, so to speak. It's a lot easier to send and receive stuff if you got a nice fast internet connection. And even things like Netflix and all these mad things you can watch on the internet, you can't watch that on a shitty internet connection. Fucking buffers every 5 seconds. It's just no. So that would boost more people, you know, in the entertainment business kind of thing or whatever. So yeah, faster internet. Please give us faster internet. 2030, man. I'll probably be dead by then. Fucking hell, I don't want to wait till 2030 to get a 1 gig internet connection. Might as well just fly to Spain. Fuck's sake. That's if they let me in. They'd be like, are you English? Yeah, you can't live in Spain. Fuck off. We've got enough of you over here. So yeah. I will be back in... Ooh, that's actually quick. An hour and a half. I'll be back in an hour and a half. And you know what for. Good old question time. I might try and upload this again as a separate video. Considering I found it on the interwebs, because the first one was garbage. It was just like out of sync, the sound was low as shite, so I might just ditch this video and upload a different one. Yeah, I don't know where the next one is, well, when, what time or anything for these mad debates. It might be tomorrow, I don't know, but one yesterday, one today, Friday. Might get one tomorrow, so I don't know. But yeah, I'll be back in about an hour and a half for question time. So grab your munch, get your blue nun ready, because this week's on as well afterwards, as you know. So yeah, I will catch you all later on. Have a good evening, and I will see you soon. Cheers, pups.